Hey, good morning, all. Welcome. And we're happy to see you joining us this late morning, late springtime morning with the Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network. We're here this morning for a presentation on creating resilience, highlighting the Harvest to Home and the Alaska Lumber Grading Program. So I'm really looking forward to today's presentation from our guests, and I definitely hope you are as well. Um, we welcome you here today, and we would really like you to put your introductions in the chat. We'll be taking a look at those, and of course, I'll see some familiar faces. But for all of you who I don't know, I'm Melinda Chase. I am one of the tribal liaisons here at the Alaska Climate Adaptation Science Center, and the CASC, which it's also known for in terms of its acronym, we come under the Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network, comes under the Alaska CASC. And we are happy to have this particular presentation today because it's highlighting some real exciting work that's being done in Alaska with some new programs that are starting up at the local level as well as statewide. So I will go ahead and just want to acknowledge that we're in the traditional lands of Trothiada, traditional lands of the Lower Tanana Dene, on the Trothiada campus. I'm based here in Fairbanks, Alaska, on the campus, which is where the Alaska Climate Adaptation Science Center is at the International Arctic Research Center. And we also have offices on the traditional lands of the Dena'ina Atlana down in Anchorage with our USGS offices there. And then, of course, we have tribal liaisons that live and work out in a couple of our communities, Quinnahock and Shaktoolik. And it's just significant to acknowledge our lands that we come from and the voices that represent stewarding those lands, which we often partner with our tribes and communities across the state. So many of you have probably seen this slide before. It is our team here at the Tribal Resilience Learning Network. We really work closely together. Some of us are affiliates, some of us are key team players, team members, I should say. And so many of you may recognize these faces that make up our team, and we encourage you to definitely reach out to us. Under the Tribal Resilience Learning Network, we really try to support tribes that are dealing with our vastly and critically changing lands and waters, and really support resilience efforts. And the way we do that is we invite one-on-one check-in calls just to help support tribes and tribal communities that are addressing some of their local concerns. We also put out a tribal resilience e-bulletin. It's about every 3 weeks. And then we have information sessions and trainings that happen around the year. So we are happy that you are joining with us today on one of those. One of the things that come across our desks often is some of the critical announcements that happen with some of our partners, and some of you may know that we are affiliated with BIA's Tribal Climate Resilience Program, and I just really want to highlight this particular announcement that I think is highly relevant to some of the issues that are happening across Alaska and across the nation for tribes and for tribal communities. The Department of Interior is having a tribal consultation related to Executive Order 1421 or 210, excuse me. And it's about implementing the Department of Government Efficiency's workforce optimization. Really, it has to do with the restructuring of Indian affairs and to address current funding structures and tribal programs, and then really addressing that through looking at the support of and the issues around self-governance and self-determination. This is one of several consultations that BIA is putting out. And of course, it will be on in Alaska on the dates that's listed here, but there's several other listed in the online on in Department of Interior's website, and you'll see the link right there. It has the Dear Tribal Leader letter. I would encourage anybody who is affiliated with tribes and understand the significance of tribal consultation to definitely go here and take a look and participate in this significant consultation or request a consultation on your own. So with that, I think pretty much our announcements are made. I would just like to encourage everybody who's had that can put themselves on mute during this presentation. So what we're here for today is to hear from our two guests. I'm really happy that Will Hartman with the Kuskokwim Corporation is here. This is the first time that the Alaska Tribal Resilience Learning Network has a guest presenter from our village corporation. And in fact, I think Will is going to explain, the structure of the Kuskokwim Corporation and who they represent in terms of the villages and the communities they work with. But when we're thinking about resilience efforts in many of our communities, we know Alaska is different than any other state. We have a corporate structure rather than a tribal reservation structure. And working with our corporations at the local or regional level is key to responding to some of the vast changes on our lands, as well as issues that we have with our complex land ownership and resource management. And so I'm happy that Will is here today. Our other guest, our additional guest, is Matt Lebrenz, who is with the Alaska Lumber Grading Program. And this is a fairly new program that has been gaining speed in terms of getting information out there. It allows for, the local use of our own lumber and forested resources in building and construction. And it's pretty exciting in terms of, what it allows us to do for basically providing for ourselves and our own self-reliance in Alaska. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Will. I'll stop sharing. And Will, hopefully you'll give a little introduction about your background for everybody, and then jump right in.
All right, we'll do. Let me get my screen shared here. There's everybody see that now? All right, my name is Will Hartman. I'm the Rural Development Director for the Kuskokwim Corporation. Been in my position about 2 years. We work a lot with infrastructure here. I'll go into a little deeper, but we also have a nonprofit TKC Fish Wheel that we use for going after funding and helping supporting some of these projects. Our office is based in Anchorage. I'm originally from Georgetown, out in the middle Kuskokwim, so my ties are to the middle Kuskokwim. I grew up there when I was younger, spent a lot of time in Bethel, went to school in Bethel, and kind of relocated to South Central as an adult. But always enjoyed going home. So start out just discussing a little bit about the Kuskokwim Corporation. So a little bit about our history. You can see here on the map, that's the middle Kuskokwim region. That picture down below is Georgetown. That's one I took years ago while we were out home fishing for the summer. But in 1977, the Kuskokwim Corporation was formed. 10 village corporations consolidated into a single corporation. So we've got the villages of Lower Kalskag, Upper Kalskag, Aniak, Chuathbluk, Napaimute, Crooked Creek, Georgetown, Red Devil, Sleep Mute, and Stony River. So today, TKC has over 4,300 shareholders living across the world. They're all deeply rooted in our values and teachings of the Yupiaq, Digaton, and Dene ancestry we all share. It is a confluence of culture, landscape, language, community, and TKC works to honor that ancestry by cultivating a sustainable future in which our people will thrive for generations to come. And early on, our elders had recognized that we are stronger together, and they were kind of some of the guiding force into all of our village corporations becoming one corporation so we can work together and combine our resources. And that's helped our corporation grow over the years. So we work to serve all of our shareholders, no matter where they live. The majority of our shareholders no longer live in the region, but we all have strong connections to the Middle Kuskokwim. And a priority of our work here at TKC is to steward our lands in a way that ensures shareholders will always have a place to come home to. We started TKC Fish Wheel, a nonprofit arm of our corporation. It was created to leverage grant funding and support projects that we're working on to help support our communities for the benefit of all of our shareholders. So far, Fish Wheel has been focused heavily on infrastructure to help our region's sustainability. We see ourselves as stewards of our homeland here at TKC. We have a duty to develop our lands and resources for the benefit of all of our shareholders. And in speaking with shareholders, we came up with 4 priorities, areas of focus for our rural development department. Those were cost of living, broadband, internet access, energy, and housing. And Harvest to Home, our housing project, helps to address 2 of these priorities, energy and housing, through using local timber resources. So our region, along with much of the state and other areas of the country, is facing a housing crisis. Approximately 35% of the households in the Bethel census area, which includes the TKC region, are overcrowded, and that's more than 10 times the national average. The cost to construct a home out in the region is anywhere from $500,000 up to $700,000. Our regional housing authority serves 48 communities in the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta and the Middle Kuskokwim. And currently they can only fund about 15 homes per year to be constructed. As of today, we need approximately 3,000 new housing units to meet the demand and need in the region, the Yukon-Kuskokwim Delta region and Middle Kuskokwim regions, to eliminate overcrowding. So that means it would take approximately 200 years just to meet the needs of housing today. So to address those housing needs, we initiated the Harvest to Home project. We work closely with our tribes. As mentioned, we represent 10 communities. Each of them has a tribe. So we work closely with them to identify their priorities. We also handle 14C3 with our tribes. So that's also a key component to providing land for communities in the region so they can build homes. Some of you may know there's going to be looks like some pretty sweeping changes to the 14C3 process. Looks like a lot of those lands will be coming back to village corporations to be managed and distributed in-house versus going through the state trustee program. So we see that as a benefit. We'll be able to work closely with our tribes and meet their needs. A couple of our villages are fairly small with seasonal populations, so they don't really fit the current 14C3 model. So we're looking forward to working with those tribes to help come up with a system that works to get them the land that they need to build homes, provide services as needed for their communities. When we looked around our region and our communities, the homes that seemed to withstand the test of time were log homes. So when we began this Harvest to Home project, we focused in on log homes just due to their resilience to the elements. They're also fairly healthy. Indoor air quality is generally better. Some of the homes that have come up into the region that were pre-manufactured and aren't really designed for Alaska can have a lot of air quality issues with mold. Log homes tend to breathe and absorb and release moisture more efficiently, so they're able to provide better air quality and healthier living conditions for our people. One other reason that we went with a timber frame or log design is to eliminate the need for dimensional lumber. Matt will touch on some of the requirements for dimensional lumber and the regulations around that. We will still be using some dimensional lumber, but when we started this program, Matt's program hadn't started quite as yet, and the state hadn't finished their regulations for dimensional lumber and using local grading. So to kind of prepare in case that didn't go through, we decided to go with timber framing. Luckily, they did allow that, and our staff has gone through Matt's training. We did a training out in our Workforce Development Center in Antioch last year. Matt put on a great training. We had a really good turnout. All the locals were really enthused about it. We had some good discussion. A lot of people who don't have great expertise in milling lumber were also in the program. Matt really catered to their needs to help explain kind of the details. So just a great job on teaching the regulations and kind of just the safety aspect of home. So we really appreciate Matt's knowledge on that. So you can see here a few pictures of our region. We are kind of the entrance to the trees along the Kuskokwim. Our lands begin just below Lower Calskag, and there are large stands of trees from there on up through the river. In 2023, TKC, along with our forester, conducted some field work. That's what these pictures are from. We are required every 10 years to update our forest stewardship plan. So we got a grant through the state of Alaska. It's a federal program to update our forest stewardship program as a private landowner. We focused on active forest management, looking at reducing wildfire and beetle danger was a couple of the key components we wanted to address out there. Beetles haven't been a huge issue as of yet, but with warmer winters, we did see evidence of beetles moving into the area. So it's really important we're able to harvest our resources before we lose them to storms, beetle, fire, etc. So we'll be using selective harvesting. We won't be going in and clear cutting everything. We'll be getting trees of a certain diameter. I believe it's 8 inches and above diameter for spruce. We'll also be harvesting birch for firewood as kind of to help drive the economics of the whole program. So we're using our forest stewardship plan, our natural resource policy, as well as the best practices and regulations for logging to develop our logging and harvesting program. So, and that focuses on the long-term health of the forests and includes reforestation and also natural regeneration if we're able to just use natural regeneration instead of reforesting. So this is a pretty big project. It involves kind of all the components of building a home, from harvesting the logs, milling the logs, all the way up to constructing the homes. So that's why we refer to it as a holistic housing project. So we wanted to combine traditional law knowledge with modern technology. So as I mentioned, we wanted to go with timber frame or log homes. We worked with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory and the Cold Climate Housing Research Center to design energy efficient log homes using a piece-and-piece construction method. So you can see here, this is at the NREL laboratory up in Fairbanks. The two pictures on the left here. This is a sample of the wall system they designed for us. So it's designed to meet home financing requirements, HUD requirements, AHFC. You can see here there's the timbers themselves, and on the outer sheathing is 4 inches of blue board hard foam insulation, then with siding on the outside of it. So that blue board insulation increases the energy efficiency, and that's what allows the homes to qualify for different funding, be it HUD, HFC, or even private financing through a bank. And you can see here's just the kind of an exterior elevation of the homes, one of the floor plans we have. We've got two floor plans, 2.5 technically. We've got a 16 by 24 one-bedroom floor plan, as well as a 24 by 40 floor plan that can either be set up as a 2 or 3 bedroom. They're designed to use both wood stoves as well as have toyos in there. So we're using what's called piece and piece construction. This is kind of pioneered with First Nations in Canada. We're working with a milling and construction expert out of British Columbia. He's going to help develop and pioneer these homes and use them for First Nations in Canada. It's more like Legos than it is Lincoln Logs. You can see here there are vertical stanchions every 8 feet, which will support the load of the roof. And then in between, we've got the 8-inch by 8-inch cants, they call them, as kind of the vertical wall components. So it's very stable. It helps eliminate some of the air gaps caused by shrinkage of logs. We'll be drying our logs for approximately a year before they go into full milling to allow some of that shrinkage to happen before we go into the final milling. So this project intends to address our goals for resource development, workforce development, and economic development by providing training to our shareholders to construct homes. And we'll utilize shareholder hire to harvest timber and operate the mill. Here you can kind of see a map of our region again. So the centralized mill will be constructed in Red Devil. We've partnered with a number of different agencies for funding. There's been a couple iterations of the plan. We looked at having kind of smaller mills set up around the region versus going with a centralized mill, and to create the piece and piece construction homes, there's a little more work on the production side in milling the logs and getting all the champers and chases cut for electrical and all that. But at the end, it makes construction extremely easy. So we went with kind of a centralized mill to house kind of the more complex processes. And then we'll be able to ship those housing packages out to communities. We still will be relying on some outside materials, windows, insulation, stuff like that. But a good portion of the money for the building itself will stay in the region by creating jobs and utilizing our own resources and providing resilience for our tribes to be able to provide the housing they need and maintain population. As we all know, there's been a lot of folks moving out of rural areas. Just the lack of housing is one issue, the lack of jobs is another. So trying to combat two of those things to help focus on preserving our tribal communities out in the region. So Red Devil was selected for a few reasons. It's in close proximity to our large tree stands. Many of our larger trees are kind of on the upriver end of our lands. It also has a barge landing, a large runway. We have available land there. The corporation has available land there to build on. And we're also trying to revitalize the community. Red Devil was a mining community. It housed one of the world's largest mercury mines that closed down in I believe the 70s. So as the mine started shutting down, the town became, smaller and smaller. Right now, there's, I believe, less than 10 people in the community. So we're looking to revitalize it by bringing in jobs and some infrastructure. So this program is not meant to replace any existing designs or programs. It's meant to supplement and to provide another option for residents. The mill capacity will allow, at the high end, about 40 homes to be produced. Initially, we'll be starting at producing 5 house packages per year and plan on scaling up over a period of about 5 years to 30 housing packages, and we'll be able to scale that based on demand. Even at that high end of production, we would only be harvesting half of what we can harvest sustainably. In looking at our sustainable harvest plan, that was one of the key things. As I mentioned, we're stewards to our lands. We want to make sure that our shareholders still have access to timber for their own firewood or building their own houses. We do have a house log program where shareholders can apply to go get their own house logs and build their own homes. So we didn't want to out and out compete with that. We wanted to just provide another path to home ownership for our community members. So again, we'll only be harvesting at peak capacity half of what we could sustainably harvest, leaving behind a lot of the trees for other uses and just kind of self-regeneration. So we want to proof the model. Our intent is to share this with other organizations. Right now, we're still kind of early on in the process. We've got our home designs completed. We've got about a 35% design completed on the mill facility itself, and we'll be going out for design here in the next few weeks. To complete the design, we'd be looking at using kind of a pre-engineered building and then kind of altering that for our needs, doing the mechanical, structural engineering, and kind of the layout of the equipment itself within the facility to finish up that. Then we'd go out to construction. So we hope to be constructing the mill facility next year and building homes as soon as 2027, more than likely. Yeah, that's my presentation. Here's just a picture of one of the homes that's been built. I believe this is in Canada. So you can kind of see what it would look like when it's completed. Also a bunch of the different agencies and some of the other organizations we worked with. So having good partnerships is key to make a project like this successful. We've got a pretty well-developed funding stack, and we've got a lot of champions at the different organizations that are really supportive of this project, which really helps to make it successful. It is quite large. We're getting ready to do our first harvest this year. We'll have a smaller limited harvest. It's going to be a bit of a learning curve this year. So we'll be looking at manually harvesting using chainsaws. You know, our people have done that for years. So trying to focus on what we do know. Eventually, we would like to scale up to more of a mechanical harvesting processes using like a skidder for moving logs, and then a actual like a feller buncher or something similar to mechanically cut down the logs and just improve efficiencies. One of the big issues, of course, is logistics and just the expense of getting things done out in the region. So anything we can do to help reduce those costs, improve efficiencies, has always been key to the project and making it successful. But that's all I have, and we'll kind of turn it over to Matt here. I don't know if Melinda's got anything else you would like to share.
I just think that that's so exciting. It's great to hear. It's like hopeful. And yes, I think that the need in the region is profound. And to see, all those partners pulling together and really specifically the work happening in the region and the partnership happening with Canada as well. That really is exciting. And when we get done with Matt's presentation, who we'll have here on a moment, we'll have time for Q&A and open it up for some discussion, because it's really nice to see some positive work in this daily reality that we've all been living with, some changes at other levels across our nation. So, all right. Well, thank you, Will and Matt. All right. Well, as I said earlier, we have Matt Lebrenz, who's with us from the Alaska Lumber Grading Program. So I will turn it over to you, Matt. And just everybody note that Matt is not in Fairbanks. He's in Tok, and so there might be a little delay with his slides. So in any case, go ahead, Matt.
All right. Yeah, thank you, Melinda. And I could not agree more. Really exciting stuff with the Harvest to Home project. It was a great presentation, Will. Very, very inspired myself seeing all those beautiful images of the home construction and the cool method you guys are using. So yeah, I'll say hi. Again, I'm Matt Lebrenz. I work for UAF Cooperative Extension Service, and I'm the instructor for the Alaska Lumber Grading Program. And with that being said, and the what Melinda mentioned about the internet connection, I'm going to turn my video off for now, and we'll pull up my presentation here. Okay, are we seeing my introductory slide?
Yep, it's good.
Okay, super. So the Alaska Lumber Grading Program is a partnership between the state of Alaska DNR Division of Forestry and UAF Cooperative Extension Service. And basically the way that works is the passage of the bill requires the Division of Forestry to be the overall administrator of the program. And it was decided early on to have the educational program, the certification program, developed and housed within UAF Cooperative Extension Service. So that's how the partnership works there. So my outcomes for my presentation here today is to explain what exactly is the Alaska Lumber Grading Program. We'll get into some details about who it's for and what exactly it does and doesn't do. And in that discussion, talk about how it relates to the grade stamp system. So one common sort of misconception out there is that this is just bringing the grade stamp system into Alaska. And it's really important to understand that this is actually totally separate from the grade stamp system. So I'll get into detail about that. And then we'll talk about how to schedule a training and how to get the certificate. And then I also want to mention an exciting opportunity coming up. We're also hosting a 2-day workshop about wood science and lumber drying. So I'll provide more details about that at the end if you're interested in that workshop. So in one sentence, the overall purpose of the Alaska Lumber Grading Program is to allow in certain limited circumstances the use of lumber that is not grade stamped to be used in light frame wood home construction in Alaska. So it's a kind of long and dense definition. And so this is a program just for the state of Alaska, and it applies to home building. And I say light frame wood home construction, and that touches on what Will was talking about. He made that distinction between log building, timber framing, piece on piece, post and beam construction. Those are all types of construction methods for building house, and each one kind of has its own building science behind it. And then another, the major construction format for home building is light frame, or a lot of people call it like stick built. So this program applies to that type of building. That being said, there's also oftentimes those building formats are hybridized. So where you might have like a stacked log wall system, you might use a light frame wood roof, such as using trusses. So oftentimes, even if a lot of your building is a timber frame or a log building, sometimes what this new lumber grading program allows can apply to that situation as well. And so this is to answer the question, why do we need a program to do this in the first place? As Melinda mentioned, the Alaska Lumber Grading Program, the overall intent of it is to allow more resilience in Alaska and for people to use our own local resources that we have at hand. So in a lot of cases, you can do that, but the case where you'd have an obstruction to doing that is where your building is subject to the building code. So that is the IRC here stands for the International Residential Code, is the most widely applied code in Alaska. We don't have a statewide uniform building code. Instead, it's enforced at the municipal level, and also any lending institution is going to require that the home that they're lending for is built up to the standards of the IRC. So most housing projects often are required to be built up to the building code. But of course, there's situations where it's not. And it's the building code that requires that lumber has a grade stamp on it. So that's where this comes from. If it wasn't for that requirement in building code, you could just go ahead and use locally produced dimension lumber. but there is that requirement that lumber has a grade stamp on it. So I wanted to touch on what is that grade stamp. So the picture on the left there shows some beautiful white spruce lumber, coincidentally. And you see that familiar looking stamp on there. Well, that stamp contains very specific and regulated and important information. So I'll quickly just kind of go through it piece by piece here. I'll start with the most obvious one. So in my training, I'll actually kind of do this as a quiz, but I'll let you guys off the hook and I'll just say what they all are. So at the bottom right there is that D fir. That's going to tell you the species or species group. In this case, it's saying that the lumber is Douglas fir. So that's important because different species have different performance characteristics. That large text saying stand and better, that's an abbreviation for standard and better, and that's the grade. So lumber is graded into different categories based on defects that are present in the lumber. And those different grades tell you the maximum spans, for instance, that you could use that lumber in. And then that S dry is telling you about the moisture condition. So that's saying that it's below a 19%. It was measured at being below a 19% moisture condition at the time that the lumber was surfaced. That's what the S stands for. The bottom left, that WWP, that's the Lumber Grading Bureau, that the grading rules were developed by. So the mill that stamped this lumber is a member with that WWP, the Western Wood Products Association, and the number 12 is the mill number. So in the case of a grade stamp, any piece of lumber could be traced back to the mill, and then the mill could be traced to what grading agency it was a member of. So all that information is really important for understanding how that particular piece of lumber can be used in a house frame. A better grade, for instance, could possibly be used in wider spacings in a wall system or a roof system. Or a different species might have higher design values that allow for longer spans, for example. So each one of those pieces tells you about the performance limits of the lumber. And so this just kind of, I won't spend too much time on this one. It just shows a hierarchy of what's all behind that stamp. So working from the bottom up, you have the sawmills, and it's the trained staff at the sawmills that apply that stamp. They, in turn, are members of an accredited grading bureau. So that Western Wood Products Association was just one example. There's several across North America. And then those grading bureaus are overseen by important boards. The ALSC is an important one, the American Lumber Standard Committee, which in turn is regulated above them. Now we're at the very top of this hierarchy at the level of the federal government, the Department of Commerce, who publishes standards documents, such as the Product Standard 20, which is the product standard for American softwood lumber. So this is just to say there's a very large, very developed infrastructure behind the grade stamp system in order to, at the end, produce a product, the lumber, that can be expected to perform at what it's stamped to perform at. So it's really a robust and good system, and very, very valuable information in the home building industry. However, here in Alaska, it poses a number of challenges. So essentially, our situation is we have vast forest resources. We're also very lucky that we know the performance data of our key lumber species. So back in the early 2000s, a group teamed up with Western Wood Products Association to test lumber samples for 5 species. And those species are white spruce, Sitka spruce, Western hemlock, mountain hemlock, and Alaska yellow cedar. So really our main commercial softwood species that are important in the construction industry. All the testing was performed to get the strength data, and that makes that lumber readily usable in home building applications. However, the really challenging piece is the cost associated with continued membership with one of those grading bureaus. So if you are a mill applying that stamp, you have to pay membership dues that pays for all of the infrastructure and work that's behind generating those design values and ongoing reviews of species and et cetera. So long story short, most mills, the vast majority of sawmill businesses in Alaska simply aren't operating at an economy of scale where they can justify those costs. And so that is the reason all of these things taken together so far are the reason that we're generally importing the vast majority of our lumber. It's coming from the lower 48, a lot of it the Pacific Northwest, and large amounts from Canada. So this creates all kinds of issues. For one, we're paying for those additional shipping costs. We're subject to any volatility introduced into the lumber market due to policy decisions and trade policies. And then, of course, Alaskans living off the road system face all those logistical challenges and more, just trying to get their building products to their site, despite the fact that they are have an incredible resource at their fingertips. So that is exactly why this program was brought into existence, and to do so, a bill was introduced to the legislature, which was passed back in 2023. And so a lot of the rules for the program are contained in this bill, and it's Senate Bill 87. If you're interested, I encourage you to take a look at the bill. Some of the key components, that includes that participants need to take a training program, and that they can get a certificate. The certificate will allow them to produce lumber and grade it, and then that lumber will meet building code requirements in the state of Alaska for residential construction. So with that being passed, and now we're at a point where we're into the second year of delivering the trainings. So if you're somebody, if you're a sawmill or want to get involved with this, here's just a very general overview of the process if you're a producer. So you would locate a training opportunity and you would go and take that. It's a one-day free training program. And then in that program, you would learn the grading rules and the system behind it. So you would use the rules to grade your lumber that you produced. I mentioned the 5 species we have the design value for. So in much of interior Alaska, you'd be using white spruce. And then you could either sell that lumber directly to an end user or personally use it in your home project. If you are selling it, you're going to provide some certifying documentation. And that's essentially the replacement of the grade stamp. So note that, again, the grading practices are very similar to what's practiced in industry. So our grading rules, if you looked up the Western Wood Products Association's rules for grading lumber, you would see that the Alaska Lumber Grading Program rules are very similar. There are some important differences, but some of the rules are actually identical. So it's heavily based on that existing information. So we're on to this step 4, that certification paperwork you'd provide to a purchaser is going to essentially replace the grade stamp, since we would not be applying a grade stamp on the lumber. And then that lumber meeting all of these criteria can be substituted for grade stamp lumber of a corresponding grade to meet code requirements where accepted. So what that means is when you apply the grading rules, you'll either sort lumber into the Alaska number 2 and better grade, or the Alaska stud grade, or the Alaska number 3 grade. And then those correspond to industry grades. And those would be called out, for example, in your home design plan. Would it call your wall system, for example, might be designed to use stud grade studs. So you could use the Alaska stud grade to substitute for those studs called out in your building plan. A couple of key program components I just wanted to mention is, as I said, the lumber can be sold to end users. So that's defined as an individual who is the permitted individual building a house, or it could be their contractor. So the sawmiller could sell directly to the contractor working on behalf of an individual who's the permitted home builder. So what that prohibits is selling, for example, to a lumber yard or a situation like that. And the idea behind it is that to preserve traceability. So if you're selling lumber, you're required to provide paperwork. That paperwork is going to have a copy of your certificate of completion of the training, your certificate number, to show that you are current with that, and the lumber that you sell would be traceable back to you. So that in the case of our program, that would be lost if you were selling it to like a commercial lumber yard, which gets outside of the intent and scope of the Alaska Lumber Grading Program. I mentioned the certification paperwork. Also different from the grade stamp industry, the certificate you get for this program goes with you, the individual. So sawmill businesses aren't certified. In this case, it goes to you. You might be an employee of a sawmill business, and if you were to leave that sawmill business, the sawmill, and you were the only one certified, they would essentially have to get somebody else certified. So that goes with the individual. And then, as discussed a little bit earlier, this program applies to dimension lumber for residential light frame wood construction. In the interest of time, I'm going to kind of breeze quickly through this slide to define dimension lumber. It's basically what we often call like 2x lumber. Your 2x4 is 2x6s. This program does not include grading for timbers, so 5-inch thicknesses and above. So if it's a timber frame building and you are doing a building system where you have like a large beam, such as a roof ridge carrying the roof load, there might you might need to have that particular framing member inspected by an engineer, for example. But then there's also other building styles similar to what Will presented on, like the stacked log system, where you might not need to undergo any additional inspection or authorization to build using that system. So I wanted to mention that. I'm going to give just a really quickly overview. This is essentially the content of the training, is learning how to visually grade structural lumber. But it's based on the premise that defects in lumber that create deviations in the parallelness of grain with the edge of the board is going to compromise the performance capability of that lumber, and that we can see those natural defects on the surface of the board. So that's why visually grading lumber works. And these are some examples of the defects that we're looking for. So oftentimes we see all the different types of warp that you can see, knots and holes, splits and shake. Decay is another important one. So what all these things have in common is that they interrupt the continuity of grain along the length of the board. And this is a powerful illustration of what happens in that case. So on our top example, a knot is basically a total departure of the grain direction. The grain direction is essentially perpendicular in the case of a knot like this. So what happens when a load is applied? That's where you'd expect to have a failure. The bottom example shows an excessive slope of grain. So in other words, the grain is running diagonal in comparison with the edge of the board. And so when that is happening too much and a load is applied, you can see it splits along that grain. So your ideal board is going to be totally defect free and have the direction of the grain running parallel along the edge of the board along the entire length of the board. So we can see examples where any interruption of that causes issues. And it's also a really good illustration that just shows sort of the urgency and importance of this. I always like to keep in mind, we're talking about structural lumber and framing members that are responsible for the integrity of the house frame. So while this program opens up a lot of new possibilities, there's also certain limitations on it. So I like to just point out that this, we're talking about the safety of our people and the occupants of homes. And so those limitations aren't just arbitrary. They're there for good reasons, because we're talking about safety here. So now on to the training. This is just a quick look at what the training looks like. So you'll get a comprehensive overview of all the program rules. We discuss wood science and the wood moisture relationship. We do an overview of the sawing process with specific concepts to keep in mind when you're creating dimension lumber as opposed to other sawn products like, say boards for siding or say hardwood products. It's gonna, what you're making has a lot of bearing on how you're gonna slice up the log that you've got. We also go one by one through each of the natural defects that are assessed in the grading process. And then it's a one-day test. At the end of the day, we take a proficiency test, and then people who successfully complete that will receive the certificate, and then that certificate allows them to either personally use or sell lumber that they've graded that can then be used in to meet code requirements for home building. So particularly who this lumber grading training is for, well, it's open to anyone and it's provided for free. And to get the certificate, we do have an age requirement of a minimum age of 18. But as far as you saw, the proficiency test and the certificate is at the end of the training. So anyone who wants to attend the training and benefit from the information is welcome to attend. But the people who will benefit from the certificate would be small to medium-sized sawmill businesses, owners of such businesses or their employees, supervisors or employees of village corporations, tribal organizations who own and operate a sawmill. Could be just an individual who has a hobby mill, and really anyone who wants to learn more about using dimension lumber in home building is welcome to attend the training. I want to note too that having some prior sawmilling and carpentry experience is very helpful to get the most benefit out of the training. So how would you schedule one if you are thinking that this applies to you and you want this to happen and be available in your community? So it's actually a requirement of the bill that the training is offered annually in the state, and the intention is to the base requirement is to be offered once annually, and the intention is to go above that and offer it at least in the 3 major regions: interior, South Central, and Southeast. But also, especially in these first few years, as we're rolling out the program initially, we're offering the training basically as warranted by demand. So for an example would be getting that training, working with Will and the Kuskokwim Corporation to offer one in Antioch. So if you think your community would benefit from a training, your basic process would just be to start the conversation with me, get in touch by sending me an email or a phone call. My last slide coming up here is going to have my contact information. And basically we'll just talk and figure out who is interested in the training, what date is going to work for them, just based on work schedules and other constraints. We'll figure out a time and a date that's going to work the best for the most people. I often ask for help from co-coordinators to identify a good training facility. And then I would set up a registration form on the website, and then it would just be open for anyone to register. Registration is required, and it's also free. And then oftentimes I'll ask for local participants to just bring in some of their own lumber that they've been making, and that gives a really good chance to use their own product to practice grading on. But other than that, I bring all the other materials that are necessary for the class. So as far as how to set up a training in your community, it just starts with getting in touch with me, and we'll work out all the details. Yeah, I just want to emphasize that the training is free. It's 1 day and certainly possible. So I encourage anyone here to get in touch with me after this to look at scheduling a training. One more quick opportunity I want to mention. Sawing and grading lumber is really just part of the process. It's also really important to properly store and dry it. And in doing these lumber grading trainings throughout the state over the last 1.5 years or so, we've learned that this is a very in-demand topic and very important. So to that end, we've set up a series of 2-day wood drying and lumber drying workshops. It's an in-person workshop. There's a lot of hands-on components to it, and it'll include wood identification, in-depth wood science. And this workshop is being taught by a guest instructor from North Carolina State University, who's a wood products specialist expert and focuses on drying lumber and the science of wood science and wood moisture. So using kilns will be discussed, as well as a big focus on air and shed drying, particularly with our Alaskan species and in our climate conditions. We're offering it in 3 different locations, and each one will be tailored to the major species used there and the climate conditions there, and including how to select and correctly use a moisture meter. So if you're interested in that, I've got a copy of the flyer up here, but you'll want to just navigate to the website. It's there at the bottom. or just Google the Alaska Lumber Grading Program, and information, times and dates of the offerings and links to register are there. It's a 2-day workshop. It's $100. And that'll include lunch both days. And it's the one in Fairbanks is coming up. It's going to be on May 7th and 8th at the Pipeline Training Center. So with that, that's me and my contact information there. Again, check out the website and get in touch by email or give me a call in my office. Would love to talk with anyone about setting up a training in their community. As noted, I'm actually in Tok for a Society of American Foresters meeting, but I'll be back in the office next week. But I am responding to emails. So thank you very much.
Excellent. Great. Thank you, Matt. That was a lot of information, and yet so illustrates so much of the process. I think that's important for people to understand, looking at both the investment of what it takes to build out a program like what the Kuskokwim Corporation is doing, but also what it takes if you are individual mill operator and really want to provide for yourself or locally for your community. So great presentations from both of you. We are down to the last 3 minutes. However, I do want to see if we can take 2 or 3 questions. If there are some questions, if you want to raise your hand. I did see one in the chat, and it would probably be directed at you, Will. Anna Michael asked, how do we apply to get a log house?
Hi, Anna. Thanks for the question. Great to see you on here. So we will be selling housing packages. This will kind of be its own standalone business once it's up and operational. We're looking at providing houses to any type of tribes directly, individuals, companies. We're hoping to work with AVCP Regional Housing and be a provider for housing packages for them. We're looking at other ways to get houses out into communities, possibly working with like YKHC in our region to provide housing for like itinerant healthcare workers or possibly even public safety folks. But right now it's going to be basically packages will be for sale at some point. So it'll kind of be up to the tribes, individuals, and communities to figure out how they want to implement their use.
Great. Thank you, Will. Genevieve, you have a question?
I do. I just wanted to thank the presenters for everything. What great information. But I have a question. Has anyone heard anything about synthetic lumber? I read something about this a few months ago and meant to do some research on it, but I haven't been able to look into it yet. And I figured this is the right place to ask. Has anybody heard about synthetic lumber?
Matt, is that something you know about?
It's not something I know a ton about, but I have heard about maybe maybe this is what you're talking about. I actually know a researcher in the engineering department at UAF, and composites really is his area of interest, and he is really interested in using waste products from the sawmill industry, so sawdust and chips, and putting those to use in some kind of a building product. So I think that might be what you're talking about. I'm not aware at all of like existing regulations around using that. I don't think there's anything like that that's being currently produced in Alaska. But certainly would be interesting, especially since sawmilling generates a lot of waste. So coming up with uses for that can be helpful.
If anyone knows anything about this, shoot me an email. I read about it maybe a month ago. I think it came out of a man was doing research over in Seward. So I'll look for that information. But can you imagine if this synthetic lumber was available to those of us up here in Alaska, how much it would do away with the cost for shipping? That's what's got me excited.
Interesting. Yeah. Well, maybe we could find out who that person is, Matt. And then I'm not sure if there's other folks here I see Stacy Fritz is on, and there might be other folks that are affiliated with cold climate housing that might know that answer or be a resource. But Genevieve is involved in a couple of different cohorts that we're involved with too, so we'll follow up with both her and others here. Does that work?
Thank you.
Oh, okay, great, Genevieve. Thanks for your question. Any other questions? Oh, good point there, Stacy. Thank you. Genevieve, I'm not sure if you're thinking about Patrick Simpson. That's who that's who Stacy put in the chat. And he makes lumber out of recycled plastics. So maybe we'll have you two follow up with each other. I had tons of questions. However, knowing both how to get a hold of you, Will, and you, Matt, I think I'll follow up with you. But I do think that, it's one of the things that I would hope that people continue to ask and share is, the ability to really elevate our chance to work together across Alaska, and how to really inform each other. The fact that, like I mentioned earlier, that you're working with Canada and the learning that's happening in that type of relationship, as well as, Matt, you're highlighting other expertise that's coming in. Many of the communities that we're working with are feeling like, how do they take this time of challenged funding that is getting either pulled back or paused, and really try to focus on what they can do with some of the expertise that we have across Alaska. So I just really am excited that you two are willing to share here today, and thank you for being on and sharing your expertise and being a resource. Thank you all, and thank you all for attending today. And so if you have questions, please get a hold of Matt and Will, and have a great afternoon and a great spring.
Thanks, everyone.